From the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Consider This, a program of issues and information behind today's news.
Hi everyone, I'm Kathy Wyatt. Welcome to the 25th season and this week's edition of Consider This. Our topic, the supply chain. Here to talk more about it is Ernie Goss. Dr. Goss is a professor of economics at Creighton University's Heider College of Business. Thank you so much for being here and welcome back.
Hey Kathy, good to be with you. 25 years. You know, my family and I came to Omaha right before that. Been at Creighton and Omaha for almost 30 years now.
Time just flies, doesn't it? Oh my goodness. All right, I want to start this discussion by having you tell us about the typical holiday shopping season.
Typically, we're looking at a lot of growth in online buying, a lot of 15 to 20% in-store, not as much. We're talking about 3 to 4% on in-store buying. And we're talking about overall growth in Christmas holiday buying. Probably 5 to 6 would be normal, typical increase. Of course, this year's not typical. Nothing's typical now. We're talking about pre and post pandemic, pre and post Vietnam War, pre and post 9/11 and so on, you know, and this is obviously continues to go on though.
Right, pandemic brought to us a disruption in the global supply chain. So from where you're sitting, tell us what that means to you.
Well, interestingly, we do a survey of supply managers in manufacturing in 9 states, the Mid-America region, and that includes Nebraska. And what we're seeing, and according to the supply managers, is supply chain disruptions, and all your viewers know that. You don't need an economist to tell you this. And the question is, what's it doing to our economy, and where are we heading, and is it likely to end anytime soon? Those are big questions. And what are some of how does this spill over into the broader economy? I think those are real questions that perhaps an economist could add some value to the answers to that.
All right, so let's take a few steps back. Let's look at the global economy, right? There are challenges that are going on around the world that are making a bad situation even worse, which of course then will impact us in some way, shape, or form. Talk about what's going on specifically around the world.
It's a lot of course, we're talking about a global economy now, which means a higher proportion of exports and imports for all the nations, particularly China and the U.S., two very important global trading partners. And what that means, of course, is we depend heavily on goods coming in and goods going out, and that's where the disruptions are. Whether we're talking about an east or west coast, particularly Los Angeles and Long Beach for the U.S., and we got this expanding economy right now, believe it or not. And it's a surprise to almost everybody that even despite the pandemic continuing, we've got buying going on, demand increasing, the economy is expanding, GDP is growing. That's how we measure economic growth typically is the GDP. Yet we've got all these other issues, these supply chain disruptions, and employment still not back to pre-pandemic levels. In Nebraska, we're talking about GDP already back to pre-pandemic levels. In other words, the overall economy is back there to pre-pandemic. When I say pre-pandemic, I'm speaking of February of 2020. But jobs are not there. We're probably down in Nebraska and most of the states that we survey in the U.S. You're talking about 3 to 3.5% down from pre-pandemic levels of jobs. So that's where that's a lot of the cause for the supply chain disruptions. I mean, it takes men and women to offload those products from other nations, particularly again China, and unload to shipments to China and to Asia and to Europe on the East Coast, for certainly.
Yeah, and I think it's really good for you to talk about that because there is that backlog. I think we live in a world, especially with the online, where we're used to ordering something today and it arriving tomorrow. And so what you're describing and what we saw in the opening video is anything but, correct?
Absolutely. And we're talking about everybody. Well, I ordered it yesterday, it appeared today. Well, in terms of the holiday Christmas buying season, I know I'm getting a little ahead here, but it ain't going to happen this year. In other words, the idea that you can depend on that delivery the next day. So what that's going to mean, and this is the good part, we're going to be shopping locally, more locally this year. Online sales will not be, we won't see the growth this year that we've seen in previous years. Previous years, 15 to 20% growth on online sales. Not going to happen this year. We're still going to see growth, online sales. We're going to see in-store sales and some of the issues there related to in-store sales.
Dr. Goss, how much worse does it get before it starts getting better?
I'm afraid, Kathy, it's going to be the second half of 2022 before we iron out these supply chain disruptions. Now, what's going to iron it out is getting more truckers. We need more truck drivers. We need more individual. Our labor force, those individuals who are in the either unemployed or employed, that share of the population in that group is too small. In other words, we keep losing men and women and even young men and high school individuals that qualify 16 and above that aren't working now. They're out of the labor force. They're not there. And that's where the real problem is Nebraska has the lowest unemployment rate in the nation. Iowa, much like Nebraska, low, yet that's stymieing growth. In other words, everybody, wow, look at that, low unemployment. Well, we need workers. We don't need unemployed workers. We need workers to come back into the workforce and take a job or look for a job. And we're not seeing that.
Let's talk about, because I know you've identified trends that we can expect to see. You've talked a little bit about some of them, but we want to put up a graphic for our viewers.
Okay.
And as we're putting that up, I want you to talk about how you arrived at these trends, going back maybe to the surveys that you mentioned earlier.
Okay.
Go ahead and walk us briefly through.
Strong retail sales. We're talking about according to my estimates, 8 to 10% growth over last year. And that's strong growth, but 5 to 6% of that is inflation. Then you're talking about hiring headaches. That means if you're looking at when you go into the in-store, buying in stores, you're going to be facing longer lines, emptier shelves, and higher prices. So we're seeing that as well.
I want to ask you, and maybe others have as well, but when we talk about this hiring challenge, how does that get better? So you said that there are people without jobs. They may not be applying for jobs, or maybe they're not finding things that are suited to them. So if this is where we sit, and we've been sitting here, how do we get out of that?
Right. Since February, beginning in March of 2020. And what happened, of course, COVID-19. And there are lots of men and women out there that have, because of the fear of COVID-19, are staying out. I'm going to stay home. That's part of it. You've also got child care issues that men and women can't come to work because of child care, the closing of child care facilities and the less space for child care. Also, you're talking about essentially 3 very large stimulus programs that have put a lot of cash in individuals' hands that are they're a little cash rich, and they're not coming back into the labor market, and they probably won't come back in until those cash, the cushions come down a bit, and that we're seeing that as well. Now, some people deny that that's an issue, but it is an issue. We had the Trump stimulus program, we had the Biden stimulus program, and we had the Federal Reserve putting its foot on the accelerator by creating money. How much money? How about $120 billion a month? $120 billion a month that they're buying bonds from the public, so that the public gives up its bonds and they give us cash. All of a sudden, I don't have a bond, I have cash. Well, you don't go to the 7-Eleven to buy Mountain Dew with a bond. You do with cash. So that's where the growth has come. As part of the growth has come from this Federal Reserve, and now the Federal Reserve is stepping back and saying, wow, look what we've created. And they're a little, I mean, I'll promise you, Jay Powell, who's head of the Federal Reserve, every night he goes to bed laying down on the pillow, he crosses his fingers. Dear God, please let it be transitory. And as I sometimes say, Powell, everything's transitory. Life's transitory. It depends on your time frame. This is not it is transitory, but what is the time frame? We're going to be stuck with these higher prices for some time now.
Okay, I want to go to the third item that you have in the trends, and that is more in-store shopping. Now, you mentioned that people will be shopping more locally. That's great news, except when you talk about the worker shortage. So now we have stores who are anticipating more shoppers. However, they don't necessarily have the workforce to support that. So what are those organizations, I guess, short of bonuses, and I know that's going on too, how are they going to make that work?
It's tough. I went to a restaurant down in the old market, Omaha here, and I pulled in the store and I looked straight ahead, and the store that used to be vibrant was closed. I mean, not only do we have retailers that have closed, that aren't there. So the ones that remain are going to be, we're going to have more and more shoppers there, and we're talking about how do they get assistance to check out individuals who are in line. When I say hey, I'd like to know more about this product, well, you may have to go online and Google it with your cell phone and find out more information, because there's going to be limited assistance in these stores, whether you're talking about the massive big box retailers to the small local, what's sometimes called mom and pop stores.
Okay, also limited would be the bargains. You've talked about that too. So go into a little bit more in terms of that particular trend. I mean, obviously we can all deduce what that's going to mean. We're not going to be able to find the deals that maybe we were able to find in the past, but talk a little about that.
Yeah, my father used to, when he'd sell, as soon as he got it in, he'd strike through the price and say, bargain. Well, some of that's going to be going on. In other words, it looks like a bargain. It's not a bargain. From last year, you're talking about 5 to 6%. So we'll still have Black Friday, still be there, but the bargain will not be as great. And there will be a rush of individuals, and a lot of us will be wearing masks, but there will be some trepidation. Individuals, not everybody wants to rub elbows out there with people who might be infected, or they might be infected. So there's going to be the retailers are going to do a good job of sort of ironing it out so that it's not a rush. We don't want to crash the doors. Maybe they'd like to crash the doors, but individuals, do we really want to walk over the top of each other and so on? So the fear of COVID is still there. So in terms of in-store sales, there is obviously still some of that fear. For example, in Colorado, the infection rates are going up as you and I speak today. Nebraska is, I have what's called a misery index, where I rank the states across the U.S. The most miserable state in the U.S., no surprise, is New York, where you've got a low job creation, and you got a high infection or death rate from COVID. Nebraska's had quite the opposite. Now we've got a low death rate from COVID-19, and we've had reasonably good job creation. Not as good as we'd like to have. In other words, as I said, we're still 3% below pre-pandemic levels.
Okay, you talked about Black Friday, and of course you're right. We don't want a big old rush of folks. Let me ask you though, if businesses start to kind of stretch that out, let's say they're starting it now, they're starting to kind of play it out now, which might be good for shoppers, right? How good is it for the business though, if they're if they're stretching that out. It used to be, and we talked about the pre-pandemic days, where they would have that one big day or that one big weekend. Now, what we're weeks out from Christmas. So what does that do to their bottom line?
It's going to improve their bottom line. We're going to see, but the improvement's going to come from those stores that have done a better job at staffing, for example, better job at checkouts, so on. So we know, in grocery stores, for example, you can check out, self-checkout. Well, we don't see as much of that in retailers, but we're going to see more and more of that in retail stores. Now, I'm not saying this particular buying season, we'll see more of that. So it's going to give an edge to those retailers that are, and not just retail, other those that serve the Christmas shopper, the holidays shopper. So we're going to see that. And here's the stock market, as all of your viewers know, has been going like crazy. Well, why? Because profits are growing. In other words, despite part of it is inflationary, but part of it is not inflation. In other words, if you subtract out inflation, profits are still growing at a good pace. So now we're going to see that for the local companies, organizations. We had what was called PPP, Paycheck Protection Program, which was part of the initial Trump stimulus plan. That went a long, long, long way to putting cash in the pockets of businesses and farmers and others in this part of the country. And we're going to see that play out in rural areas in Nebraska with more spending. Now again, it's going to be important. Well, I certainly can't advise retailers on how to do it. They know how to do it. But how do you give shoppers comfort that all of a sudden, and it might be, I can't advise wearing a mask, but you could have some that I'm not going in the store with a mask, and others I'm not going to go in a store unless it does have mask requirements. Those things, and I would certainly obviously leave that up to the retailer, who can do a far better job than I would ever do.
Dr. Goss, I want to ask you, because your fifth trend is more cash to spend. I want to go back to when these payouts were made, and I also want to kind of tie it with the unemployment piece of it. I mean, how much cash really is there when you think about that money going into people's pockets and them needing it because they didn't have a job, or because the bills were adding up, during the height of the pandemic? Talk a little bit about that. When you say more cash to spend, what do you really mean there? What's left?
No, there's a lot. In other words, the reason that, the surprising part is unemployment was not as dire in this pandemic as it has been in previous periods. Why not? Eviction moratoriums on evictions. We had that. You and I did a program. You had me on a program on that very issue, and that's still the case. We've still got eviction moratoriums in some cities across the U.S. We're talking about housing payments. Tacking on, instead of paying your house payment today, we'll tack it on at the end of 20 years or 25 years or 30 years. That put cash in the hands of individuals. We're talking about food stamps, increase of 25% there. We're talking about $300, I may be wrong about this, $300 child care. Each individual out there, whether if you made below a certain amount of money, you get $300 for each of the kids you have under a certain age. So if you have 4 kids, $1,200, maybe more than that, but $1,200 at least per month, and that still continues on. That puts cash in the hands of individuals, and it contributes to inflationary pressures.
Okay, you mentioned the housing market, so I'm going to digress a little bit there. Folks putting their homes up for sale and making more than they would have otherwise. How is that looking right now? Are we kind of getting to the tail end of that, or are we still going to see those homes going up for sale and think, oh my gosh, is it really worth that?
You know, Kathy, I could pull my cell phone out here and I could show you calls. I have rental properties. I don't manage them. I have somebody. I get 3 or 4 or 5 calls a day to buy my properties. We're at the end of that. In other words, Zillow, for example, they scooped up all these properties, buying them from those individuals like myself. I didn't sell any, but from individuals. And now Zillow found out they overpaid. And so Zillow's, all right, let's get out, and taking hits. Zillow's taking a big hit. And others will take a hit. what I would say is the easy money's gone there. If you're buy a house because you want to live in it, buy a house because you have a family, the family wishes to move into a house, buy a house because you're getting a very attractive interest rate, mortgage rate. Don't buy a house for investment purposes, in my judgment. I think the easy money's gone. We're talking about year-over-year growth, Kathy, in urban areas, 19 to 20%. Year over year, 19%. That cannot be sustained. It cannot be. Now, as the famous Herb Stein economist said back in the 50s, now, I wasn't there, but he said it, and he said that if something can't go on forever, it will stop. Now, that's good economic advice. You never know when the music. It's like when I was a kid, we had this game you played, which was where you walked around. There were limited, and music was playing, and you walked around a cakewalk.
Oh, it's cakewalk.
Cakewalk. When the music stopped, you got rushed for a chair, and one person didn't get a chair. Well, that's the way we're going. The music is going to stop, and you, instead of having not enough chairs, you're going to have too many chairs, and that's too many houses. And somebody's going to get caught there, as they did back in 2008 and 9. We had a housing problem. Now, it was different. It's very different from this one. But it's going to, just watch your step right now. I'm not a buyer of housing. I'm not buying. I bought back in 2008, and I turned it over to property managers. I'm hands off. I want nothing to do with this. You take care of it. And that's what's happening right now. Again, though, buyers are still there. They're still trying to buy my properties. Somebody's going to get stuck.
Can I ask you about the auto industry then? Because we've really seen over the past several months, well, for as long as these homes have been going up and making considerable dollars, it's been really tough to find a good used car. So what can our viewers expect in terms of the auto industry? It's
tough because of the shortage of semiconductors, one reason. Prices are up on used cars and new cars as much as 20% year over year, 20 to 30%. And I'll give you my own personal experience today. I just got a new car, and I must have run over a curb. I have a flat tire. They can't replace the tire right now. I mean, things like that. Wow. And I'm thinking, well, wait now, what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to have to do something. I don't know. But that's what we're running into right now. Automobiles. We'll see that slowly dissipate into 2022. But right now, it's not a time to be looking for. It's time to be. If you have an extra car, sell it. If you need a car, maybe hold off. If you can. Prices are going up. The bargains are just not there. The trade-ins, you get a good trade-in price, obviously, but the gap between the two has remained about the same. In other words, they'll give you more for your car, but you're going to pay more for the new car. And that's what we're seeing.
Thank you. I want to go to your sixth and final trend now in just the few minutes we have remaining, holiday travel.
Holiday travel is going to be fantastic, but it's going to be problematic because of everybody's trying to get on those flights, limited flights. We have fewer pilots, less capacity among airlines, but it's all holiday. It's families. Business travel, not back. We're not seeing business men and women traveling to any extent almost. In other words, those conference hotels practically empty out there across the U.S. Even in Las Vegas. Las Vegas is depending heavily on individuals and families coming to shop, to gamble, and to not businesses. So when does business travel come back? And that's a real big issue. I mean, all of us collectively have gotten comfortable sitting in our house working, doing Zoom conferences. We have, doing Zoom classes. We don't, not anymore. We actually at Creighton, we haven't done much of that, but I'm in class. But more and more, we're staying home and doing those where we would be traveling to New York, Zoom it. And that's an issue for, there's where the hotels make a profit and where the airlines make a profit. So if you're traveling, you're going to find it easier to upgrade. So you may get that first class ticket, upgrade to it much more easily than you could in the past, because the business traveler is not going to be in that first class seat. There are not going to be as many of them.
Okay, we've got a minute left or so. We have our viewers watching on the edge of their seats saying, okay, Dr. Goss, I want to make the season as bright as I possibly can for my loved ones. Give me the tips. What do I do?
The tips, I think, is just enjoy it with your family because, and I'm sorry to be spoiled. We may have to turn to having these. My family, we're going to have a nice sit in the kitchen or the dining room and have a nice dinner. But in terms of shopping, and I think shop early, and do research before you go. Don't just go out there. Shop the store in advance. I don't mean shopping online. I mean shop and find out what's available in these particular stores. And some of even the small local stores have an online presence, and they'll give you talk to you about, and also look at the times. Don't go out there thinking, well, they'll be open to 9 o'clock. They may well not be. In other words, in previous years, they might be open till 9. They may be closing at 6 o'clock now.
Talking about the supply chain with Dr. Ernie Goss. Thank you so much. You're always just such a pleasure, pleasure to visit with, a wealth of information, and we appreciate it very much.
I'm always glad to be on with you, Kathy. Thanks for having me on.
You bet. Happy holidays to you.
Happy holidays to you.
Thanks to our students who are working so hard behind the scenes, and of course all of you for watching. As we close, a look at Memorial Park as seen through the lens of Nathan Sweats, a junior here at UNO.
Consider This is an issues and information program produced by UNO Television. More information and program archives can be found at nebraskapublicmedia.org/considerthis. If you'd like to share your comments about this program, call UNO Television at 402-554-2516 during regular business hours, or send an email to cwyatt@unomaha.edu.
It is the longest-running Omaha-based statewide television program on the air today. Hi everyone, I'm Kathy Wyatt, producer and host of Consider This. Now in our 25th season, we wish to acknowledge those who have made this educational journey possible. Our guests, underwriters, student crews, the Knowledge Network, the University of Nebraska at Omaha, and of course, viewers just like you. Thank you for watching.